Welcome to episode 22 of the Filmumentaries podcast. This is Jamie Benning talking to you from my little house here in southeast London. It's March 2021, spring has sprung. Yesterday, it was a beautiful day. I went for a nice bike ride in the woods amongst nature and the world felt good. Today, it's fucking freezing cold again and I'm sat here with my indoor hat on, just trying to keep warm. The perils of having a shiny bald head, people. This episode was recorded way back in November 2019 in another world, a world we can barely remember, but one I hope we will become acquainted with again. So on that morning I picked up my good friend and cameraman Paddy Tyndall from London Heathrow. He had a job here in Europe but flew over a day early to help me do this interview. He was very kind in lending his kit and his expertise. I put him up for the night and fed him, though not after midnight. He tends to multiply if you do. That's not even a relevant film reference. Anyway, we headed up over to the other side of London to interview producer and writer Ivor Powell. Ivor was the associate producer on The Duelists, Alien, Blade Runner, all for Ridley Scott. But his first feature work was as a publicist on 2001 A Space Odyssey for Stanley Kubrick. I'd been in touch with Ivor about 12 months before after I interviewed Robert Watts. I wanted to continue to talk to prolific British film producers about their careers, and during a phone call to introduce the idea to Ivor, he was keen to point out that his career was far from over, as he'd just co-written a new sci-fi script that was due to be shot in Mexico later in 2018, starring Tom Hanks and directed by Miguel Sapochnik, and that I should contact him in the summer of 2019 to arrange the interview so that he could talk about that as well. Our chat about that film, called BIOS, the script that he wrote, is not included in this interview here and now. I'm going to include it as a separate podcast when the film is due for release later in the year. So Ivor welcomed us into his lovely home and gave us plenty of time and space to set up the camera equipment. No rush at all. He put the kettle on. I also took him a couple of gifts, which I often do with my interviewees. With Robert Watts, I took him a couple of Formula One autographs, a signed cap of Lewis Hamilton and a signed piece of paraphernalia from Sebastian Vettel. And for Ivor, I knew he was a fan of those old B-movies, so I bought him a couple of coffee table books with the poster art and things like that. He was very touched. The video version of this interview is available on my Vimeo channel, vimeo.com/filmumentaries. The audio version, which you're about to hear, represents the longer conversation we had. Of course, with a video, it needs to be heavily edited and painted with film clips and photos, etc. But I also thought the audio worked in podcast form because it's very conversational. I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on, but here's my interview with producer and writer Ivor Powell. So how and when did you enter the film industry? What was the beginning for you?
Well, I've always said that luck, I've always been pretty frank about this, that luck plays a major part in just about obviously every career, but it certainly played a part in mine because although I wanted to get into the industry at an early age without a clue as to what that involved or what I really wanted to be, my aunt happened to be who is the youngest of a family of about 6 or 7 siblings, but my aunt was a famous film critic working for the Sunday Times called Ivor Powell, and she, with a slight incline of her head, looked down at me and sort of, you could tell what was running through her mind about, oh gosh, you know, why does he really want to get into this industry? Is it for the right reasons or what? But anyway, she got me a load of interviews with some amazing people of the day, like Sir Michael Balkan, Anthony Asquith, and lots of sort of documentary films that were fairly, you know, well known at the time. And after, I don't know, chomping my way through a whole load of them, I mean, I eventually got taken on, I think, as a I suppose it was called assistant producer, with a guy called, I think it was, there were two, there was a Sir and a Lord, Sir Michael Birkett, I think, and Lord Archibald, and they were running a documentary company that were doing a little documentary up in Wales about the Duke of Edinburgh award scheme. So I got onto that, but if I'm to carry on rambling, I mean, my very first entry into the industry as such was not in the film industry at all. I went into the theatre which is not really where I wanted to go. So, I mean, insane though it may sound, because it was a golden opportunity and I could have probably had maybe a halfway good career there. I got taken by H.M. Tennant's, which were big sort of theatrical impresarios at the time, to be a trainee ASM on the New York production of West Side Story at Her Majesty's in the Haymarket, and so I did my sort of apprenticeship there, which was a pretty short one, 9 months or so, but nonetheless working in the amongst the sort of starry cast of that. I mean, absolutely mind-blowingly wonderful. And then I got pushed across to the Theatre Royal Haymarket, where they were doing a Terence Rattigan play about Lawrence of Arabia called Ross, which was starring Sir Alec Guinness, and so once again, I did that, but I did that sort of for real. I had a vague idea of what I was supposed to do, so I did that for about a year and a half before I then went back into movies again. I walked away from that. Silly idiot. But
and not knowing what it was that attracted you to the film industry. I mean, what gave you that drive to make a leap from what you could have been an established career in theatre to go and do?
I don't know. It was just the magic of sitting in a cinema. I remember my aunt always saying that every movie that she kind of just quietly sat down in the seat, it went dark, and then suddenly the screen comes up, the sound comes up, everything, and I mean, you're just in a magical world. And that kind of, I have the same, I don't know. I mean, I'm like a punter in that sense, if that's not a bad word to use. I mean, I don't really watch films. I just watch it because I'm absorbed, I'm entranced, I'm taken in by the magic of it all. And I think she was too.
It's interesting you say that about being sort of whisked away to those in those films and drawn in, because the films that you worked on, 2001, Alien, Blade Runner, they've all had worlds that were so convincingly created, and really do take you away and draw you in. I mean, you worked with Stanley Kubrick almost off the bat there. What was your experience on 2001? Am I right, you worked as a publicist?
Well, yeah, publicist is way too grand a word. No, again, my aunt had talked in the past to Carl Foreman, and he was a pretty big producer at the time, and I never met him, but I know that some other friend who was looking for an assistant, etc., who knew him, spoke to him, and he said, "Oh, well, I've got this, blah, blah, blah." So anyway, I had this call from a guy called Roger Carras, who was head of publicity, and again working on, but based in New York, but working on what was then known as Journey to the Stars. So I got this call from him, and I went along to meet him at the Carlton Towers Hotel, and he sort of asked me, he sort of like auditioned me and asked me to write something down, and just anything, it didn't matter what. And so I wrote something about Muzak in lifts or something that was probably, I don't know, fairly incoherent, but because I hadn't a clue really what was wanted. And but anyway, for whatever reason, I got to meet on the Monday. I got called up to meet Victor Linden, who was Stanley's associate producer. And he became like a mentor to me and everything for the rest of his life. I absolutely loved him. He's like a sort of second dad. And anyway, he basically agreed with Roger that I was vaguely okay. And so off I started. This morning I was actually looking on my old computer upstairs at the letters that that Roger actually sent when I was taken on board, and then the letters that he sent to me after speaking to Stanley about when I was sort of taken down into off being a junior publicist, and I was actually sort of, I don't know whether it was promoted or demoted because my salary was reduced, but I was put down working alongside Stanley in sort of a thing called the War Room, with a couple of guys, Con Pedersen and Wally Vivers and others, in this war room, which was basically where all the sort of effects shots were planned and things. You know, all the various elements were sort of laid out on Sasco charts around the walls. So yeah, so that's how I got taken on. I'd never done anything like publicity before, so it was a kind of a learning curve. But again, the letter this morning that I just looked, which sort of outlined what I was supposed to do when I started, I don't know how long since I've read it, but it really actually does lay out exactly what my job was, to make myself acquainted with the other publicists, you know, the MGM publicists out there, but more importantly to make myself known to Tony Masters, who was the production designer, Bob Cartwright, who was the set decorator, etc., and sort of find out what their needs were. And on all accounts, with some of these companies like IBM, Honeywell, whatever, Pan Am, not to in any way get involved in doing any funny kind of negotiation or deal myself on my own, because, as he quite bluntly put, I don't have the experience to do that, and it better just stay clear of that. So anyway, I did.
And Stanley was a pretty formidable kind of guy, wasn't he? And I know you've told this story before, but you told a story once about the letter that Stanley wrote about why are they paying you.
So the Cleopatra letter. Yeah, I know, it's funny, isn't it, what gets known for that? But yeah, he had a very intense look about him. I mean, again, looking at some pictures this morning, he was laughing a lot on that movie as well. Certainly in the pictures that were taken, and I mean, he had different sides to him, like all of us, and he had quite a juvenile side in some respects, but also, his intellect was formidable. And I, quite frankly, in the first year or so of working on it, maybe I'm exaggerating, maybe it wasn't quite a year, maybe it was sort of like 9 months or something like that, I didn't say a word to him. I mean, I was just some little guy that would sort of see him marching past purposely, etc., and maybe once said, you know, good morning or whatever it is, but that's about it. And I was just aware one day, I think, when Roger called me up, I think from New York, and sort of warned me that Stanley was slightly on the warpath about the salary that had been done for me. Now, when I was taken on, I was working at the BBC. I was recruited in the BBC when BBC Two started up, and that's when I left the theatre and I joined there for a year or so. And it was a fantastic job, and I could have had probably, with luck, a fantastic career at the Beeb. But I was like barely, I scraped in under the 21-year-old mark, which is, normally they take on people 21 years old or whatever it is, but I scraped in, and out of I think it was like 12,000 applicants, I think I was one of about 12 or 20 or something who got taken on as assistant floor managers, I think it was, or floor assistants even, I was probably. And I'm losing the thread now of the flipping question. What was it about Stanley?
The letter, the Cleopatra.
Oh yes, sorry, my apologies. So this letter arose because when I was taken on, I was also doing moonlighting or doing some modelling and photographic modelling, and earning quite a lot of money for the time. And so when Victor Linden, bless his heart, interviewed me, he said, well, what sort of salary do you want? And I'm absolutely hopeless at that sort of thing. And I kind of flustered. And I was at that time probably earning, I don't know, 60, almost probably 100, I don't know, must have been earning about 60 quid a week or something, which was a lot at that time. And the BBC were paying me like £9 a week, I think, plus overtime, which was quite rare for the Beeb. And so I sort of said to him, well, I'd be happy to Victor I'd be happy to get 16 sort of thing. But I think he misheard it as 60. So they employed me at 60 a week. And of course, this got known, I mean, via the accounts department or whatever. There's this young publicist who's, jumping around, having a good time, working up in the art department, enjoying himself, and he's earning more than half the art department who've been working in the industry for whatever it is. So anyway, Stanley got to hear of this eventually, and basically, hence the memo. So I was basically about to be bumped. And I think, again, luck, whatever it is, I bumped into him, and I don't know whether he started a conversation or I talked to him, but somehow there must have been some point of engagement where he saw something in me. But so I was my salary was halved, renegotiated, and I got reassigned down to him in the sort of the main office down.
It's interesting how these things. Moments, isn't it? The sliding doors.
I know.
Kind of thing. Yeah. When did you move on working with Ridley Scott? How did you meet Ridley?
Well, again, complete chance. I was struggling after 2001. I did a year on a big movie which Victor Linden went off to do, called The Adventurers, from a Harold Robbins story that was shooting in Rome for a year. And so my wife, we'd been recently sort of married. My wife and I went out there. Thought Rome for a year, what could be bad about that? I didn't speak Italian, whatever it is. But anyway, so I was a location manager on that, but what was in my path was as an assistant director. I was slowly working my way up through production, which is the old-fashioned way of kind of doing things. And so when I finished on that, I came back and I was sort of, trying to get myself work as a first assistant, which I even did a tiny bit on 2001 after Derek Cracknell left. I mean, obviously not really knowing what the hell I was doing because it was not main unit or anything like that. So I had a call one day from Paul Cowan, who became quite a well-known producer and who's subsequently recently died and is sorely missed, but he was my second. And he called up and basically said, look, I've got a week's work being offered to me, and I've said yes to this 2-day job or something from some company. I've never heard I no clue who they are. They're called RSA or Ridley Scott Associates or something, and they're doing some commercial at Isleworth Studios. Do you know anybody? And I said, sod it, yeah, I'll do it. So that's how I ended up working for Ridley, and when he found out I'd worked on 2001, and we sort of seemed to hit it off. So I became his regular first, and then ultimately, within a year or something, I got taken on as his main producer.
Amazing. So you jumped in with 2 feet there. You can't, as you said.
Well, I know.
I mean,
I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary, really.
Mm. And then you worked on commercials with Ridley, right? And then, is it right that you were the one that kind of encouraged Ridley to look at science fiction, as it were, in terms of Alien? Like, he wasn't a fan of science fiction.
He was not a fan of science fiction at all. Did not get it. He loved. I mean, he would love. I seem to remember around about the time. Was it Get Carter? I'm not even sure it had been made, but I know. Maybe we had a copy of the script, and so he kind of liked that sort of gritty, like, gangster movie. At the same time, he loved historical drama because he saw that was the way he could actually use his eye, use everything, and he just loved that period. Hence The Duelist, obviously the first film. And when I kept on sort of talking about, I mean, he obviously liked 2001, but that was kind of a different ball game. But when I sort of started talking about B movies, horror movies, X the Unknowns or whatever it is, or the, I can't even remember half the damn things now. The Thing. He would look at them, and then we had a little tiny theatre in the offices, and he would say, "It's a pile of shit, whatever it is. I just don't get it, or whatever." So I did kind of. It had, again. I've oft said it, but we had gone down to the Dordogne in the middle of France for a recce, and we were coming back on the fast train from Brive, the station there. You go back to Paris on, and there was just this Metal Hellon, this heavy metal comic strip book that was sitting on the news rack, which I bought. and we were sitting opposite each other in the carriage, hurtling back, and he sort of, his little eyes narrowed, and he sort of looked at it, and he sort of said, "Let's have a look at that." And there was a Dana Bannon story in there, I think it's The Long Tomorrow or The Long Something or Other, and I don't know, he just suddenly, he liked that, he loved that kind of imagery, etc. And so, I don't know, listen, it awakened perhaps something in him. And of course, obviously after The Duelists, I mean, again, Sandy Lieberson, who was head of UK 20th Century Fox, took a big punt. I mean, he obviously knew David Putnam, who was like the producer on, certainly the money-raising producer on The Duelists, and they were mates. And he obviously, Putnam obviously talked to Lieberson about, Ridley's, got something, and so I guess, so Sandy Lieberson sort of plucked a copy of Alien when they were looking for another director, and thrust it across. And again, that you'll have heard it many times before, that Ridley this time wanted to read it first, etc., and I had to sit the other side of his office with a closed kind of door. I was in my little office and he was in his one on the other side, and all I could hear him sort of going, "They're fucking joking. You've got to be fucking joking." Oh, gee, he was, as he was reading the various bits of Dana Bannon's and Ron Shoussett's sort of thing with the alien ripping people's heads off and crawling across the ceiling and things sadly that never, well, not sadly, that never ended up in the picture. But
he obviously saw something in it, didn't he? And
oh yeah,
he's a very visual movie
totally,
maker. And
totally.
I watched The Duelists again a couple of days ago, and every frame of it looks like a painting.
It does indeed.
It's incredible.
Yeah,
absolutely incredible. And Paddy and I were talking about Alien on the way over, and it's the same in that film. I was just scrubbing through it on the iPad, saying, "Look, every place I stop is a fantastic frame."
I know.
It's an obsession of his in a way, isn't it? To compose those, sometimes to the detriment of the people in front of the camera.
Totally, yeah. I mean, he's a different person now. I mean, apart from the fact that now the way movies are well, it depends who the director is, but he obviously directs movies now. He's basically directing from a bank of screens, really. So he's almost further removed from the actors. But I'm sure now, being who he is, and being so prolific, I mean, he and actors find a way through all of that, etc. So, yeah.
So what would you say is your kind of biggest contribution to getting Alien on the big screen, as it were? I mean, what was your role in Alien? And was there a particular moment where you noticed that it was going to not just be a B picture and it was going to become this A picture? Was it when Ridley got on board?
I think so. I think the people that had been... I can't remember who had been involved. I mean, obviously, Walter Hill had been involved, but I think Walter would have... Though Walter does have an inimitable style, he's a bloody great director, but this was completely in a tangential sort of different direction for Walter, making something like this, which is maybe why he went off to do The Warriors as opposed to this. And I you probably know more, but I forget what other directors might have been approached. But I think Ridley, with his slight cynicism or whatever about sci-fi, and certainly his dislike of the sort of B-movie type things, I think that's what was that in one perverse way was the magic ingredient. Is his eye, his sort of production designer's eye, his everything. The fact that I really learnt how to make movies working with him on commercials, because they were all really high-end commercials, and with a relatively small crew, tiny crew compared to the sort of extravagance of making movies today. Which is unbelievable, really. But we made crews just quicker, more efficiently, more whatever. And I think the crew respected people like him because he never really stopped working. And so he kind of had this loyal retinue, really, of technicians, from production designers and lighting cameramen down through the ranks, who were all prepared to go to the ends of the earth for him, But although that wasn't them, there were lots of newer, people that we hadn't used before on something like Alien. But I think that just made a major difference to it. So my job on Alien was with some trepidation. I had to do a budget on it because I have to say that I hadn't done many budgets before. That's the bizarre thing, really. I mean, I'd never really stayed in one position. I kept on keeping moving forward, etc. So I wasn't really an established first assistant director. Wasn't really an established line producer as such, but got there somehow. So when one did the budget, and somehow it was twice as expensive as they were planning, I think, on spending with Walter and things. But I guess somehow we got, somehow somebody said yes, the Fox over in the States, the lad, Alan Ladd, and everybody kind of nodded. So we got the go, and again, Giger and things like that, who Dan O'Bannon brought to Ridley's attention. I mean, again, that's another major sort of factor in the fact that just made it something, and the fact that Ridley was able to capture Giger's sort of look.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, how one design department was Giger, the other design department was Ron Cobb doing all the hardware and stuff,
absolutely.
And two separate worlds, and it so shows on the screen that...
But they can't, they just work, because there is, Ron's the realist in a sense, the people that we had in droves on, like Harry Lange on 2001, but he was brilliant. He knew it was based on sort of some kind of science and logic, but Giger was just, out of the world.
Yeah, I mean, there's not many people that you'll ever come across again that are quite like him. He's just, something...
You try. I mean, how many people have tried to envision what an alien life form is going to look like? And I mean, obviously we've had Spielberg and Close Encounters and E.T. and things, and but yeah, there's nothing like Alien. There's nothing like the Alien, and all the kind of the echoes of that in one or two subsequent films. I'm not necessarily the Alien sequels. I'm talking about other sci-fi films that kind of copied it a bit.
Yeah, we were talking about it on the way down, but just how I think I first saw it when I was about 7 or 8, which was far too young. And it took me a good 10 years to go and watch it again. And even now, just those opening shots slowly roaming throughout the spaceship through the Nostromo and revealing the set to us, revealing the world to us.
Magical. And we again, with Jerry Goldsmith's music, it was just, I don't know, I can hear it in my head now, and as you talk about it, just brilliant.
Yeah, it's a proper goosebump kind of moment, isn't it? I know Ridley's gone on and made the other alien-related movies, Prometheus and so on, but what do you think gets lost in the mix using today's techniques as opposed to what you were doing back in the 70s? Well,
obviously, the movie industry nowadays, I mean, it's an industry, and it costs a lot of money to make movies like that, and basically, you spend that kind of money, investors, expect return. So I think, when things become franchises, I know generalizations are a bit... unwise, but I think what the original story just had a slight simplicity. Obviously, it had just one alien as opposed to loads, and I liked the second one. I thought that was good. Then I think the third and the fourth one went up. Yeah, I don't know, went up a particular road that I always watched them, but I don't think they're going to endure. And I think, the first one that Ridley made back again had some potential, but I found certain things about it slightly, for me, frustrating, because I being rooted again in the logic and the science of 2001, that this was how it would be done. I was always whispering in Ridley's ears, sort of saying, well, what's the rationale for this? Why would this simply would not be like that, etc. And he would sort of say, sod it, it looks great. I don't give it. And he got away with it. Yeah. But I think the funny enough, I seem to remember, I can't remember the moments. What was the next? Was it Prometheus? Was that I seem to remember when they went into the mothership and they started to take off their helmets and things like that, and then they kind of, I don't know, people ran off or got lost. Just does not sound very scientific to me. And I think if you start going off the beaten track like that, then you're not dealing. You've left science behind and some of the logic, and I think therefore it becomes a different thing. I don't know. It becomes a bit sort of fantasy. And
it's interesting you say it, because that is the exact same thing I've always said about Prometheus, that the motivations of the characters just didn't sit right somehow.
Yeah.
And regardless of some of the things that Ridley did in Alien, I think I saw an interview with you before where you talked about that shot where the water's dripping down, and it's like, why is there water on a spaceship? And he said, fuck it, let's just do it. It looks great.
Yeah,
and
which
it
did.
And it did. And it has some logic in some way. It sort of does something to the tension in that scene, and it motivates those characters. But maybe he needed somebody like you whispering in his ear. We're about halfway through my conversation with Ivor, and we'll be back after these short messages.
Are you tired of pop culture podcasts where the hosts exist in a constant, blissful state of agreement? Well, fear not. Let me introduce you to the Chinstroker versus Punter podcast. Mike is an ex-film student with a penchant for David Lynch, and Paul is your man on the street who likes what he knows and knows what he likes. Join us fortnightly as we discuss what we've been watching from our own very different perspectives. You can find us at csvsp.libsyn.com. Chinstroker vs. Punter is a proud member of the Pod Syndicate family of podcasts.
Here's what some people are saying about the Projection Booth podcast.
The Projection Booth is single-handedly the greatest film podcast you could ever listen to or could possibly want.
Top notch. 5 stars. This has quickly become one of my favorite film-related podcasts. Always interesting.
A completely unpretentious yet fully comprehensive look at films from all genres.
The Projection Booth podcast, with new episodes available every week at projectionboothpodcast.com.
Having done, the budgeting on Alien, was there anything that really stood out where you thought, Christ, that I didn't realise it was going to be that expensive? Or conversely, was there anything where you thought, wow, we've got a bargain here and it looks fantastic?
I had not. I mean, when one saw some of the sets at Shepperton, I mean, they were just absolutely amazing. I mean, again, the standard of the workmanship, the craftsman, I mean, the plaster shop, the whatever it is, the construction shop, they were just bloody brilliant, absolutely brilliant, and you could not believe that I didn't have that kind of in my head when I was budgeting it. Obviously, Mike Seymour, the production designer, must have, I can't even remember now, he must have given me some kind of clues as to what he thought the thing was going to cost, and Ridley and he must have exchanged some words, I think, because I can't imagine I'd have plucked those things out of the air. But I don't think I've ever worked on a movie where we didn't at some point have financial problems. It's just it's part of the process, unfortunately. And I know that we had quite a lot of problems with they were Fox were quite rightly so breathing down our necks because we were going over, and I was desperate to, obviously, for Ridley to get his vision, but at the same time one had a kind of one was expected to, as a line producer, try to toe the budgetary line. So it's a difficult path.
Yeah, it's a hell of a balance to try and fulfill Ridley's vision whilst maintaining and keeping a relationship with Fox, I guess. I mean, I can't imagine, I've budgeted for things before, and I kind of figure out how much I think it's going to cost, then I add a bit and add a bit more and keep adding a bit more until I think it's unreasonable, and then take a bit off. That's kind of how it works. No, I mean, those sets just on Alien just really are incredible, and I think one of the stars I saw was talking about how once you were on the set, you were on, because it was all linked together, and I think that again, whether that was a conscious effort by Ridley to make it claustrophobic, I don't know, but it certainly worked. Every scene moves the story on, doesn't it? And the set is a big part of that. We're fans of that documentary, Jodorowsky's Dune. Came out a few years ago. That, kind of talked about his lavish ideas for that movie. Were you aware of that process sort of having gone on before Alien was made?
Yeah, no, I was aware. Obviously, the stories of Dan and working out in Paris and everything like that. I mean, the answer is yes. I mean, Dune is is one of my favourite books. Frank Herbert's an amazing writer, and Ridley and I at one time were going to be doing that with old Dino De Laurentiis while he was still with us, but I know Ridley didn't really quite get the book, couldn't get himself into it, so I had to sort of précis it. In fact, I sat on a settee along here, actually with my wife watching the telly a zillion years ago, while I was sort of breaking each chapter down so that he could kind of assimilate it and sort of get a handle on it all. It'd be interesting to see what Ridley would have done with Dune, with his sort of northern grittiness and his vision. Could have been pretty interesting.
Yeah, we were saying that I think if Jodorowsky had fully attempted it and gone and shot it, probably would never have been finished and probably would have been 10 hours long, and maybe Alien, Star Wars, all those other films wouldn't have been made. Because
no, that's possible.
I think, no disrespect, but I think Alien was probably riding on that success wave of Star Wars, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
With Alan Ladd having greenlit that and got hit the jackpot, I guess. Timing is a big thing, isn't it? How on earth do you think, moving sort of towards Blade Runner now, how on earth do you think that in those movies they managed to create such believable worlds? Was it the right people? Was it Ridley? Was it a combination of those things? And what do you think can you put your finger on any one thing that they did right? Because those two films are still looked back on 40 years later, and they're still better than anything that's out there now.
I know. I saw Blade Runner at the Albert Hall recently, where they had the orchestra playing with a picture digitally projected up. And I'll tell you what, I saw it through kind of different eyes. Not absolutely the first time, but this time it almost like cemented it, and it really, I kind of got it. Because when you make a movie, when you're that involved and you work for God knows how long before, and you go through versions of the script, etc., whether you're a writer or whether you're just a producer, etc., you go through all these stages. It's very hard to step back and detach yourself from that movie when you see it and everything. You're always thinking of, I remember that scene that was in there, or that dialogue wasn't like that, or whatever it is, or it was much brighter than that, and now all of those things. And so it's very hard to be absolutely objective, I guess, if that is the right word. So I think it's just Ridley, and it is his this amalgam of gritty northern values and his eye. That is it. He kind of, I think the absolute perfect example is say take something like Logan's Run, which is just sci-fi with a capital S and a capital F, and I mean it's just now it's so laughable. It's sort of, it doesn't age or mature at all. It just really, you can't watch it really. Kids would giggle. But whereas Blade Runner now is just as powerful and just as effective and meaningful, if not more so now, especially now that the world has become what it is, with, environment and all of that, extinction of wildlife, etc., etc. It has really become, a gathering force.
Yes, it's always struck me with Blade Runner that people were so influenced by it that it's almost led us down that path in some ways. It's difficult to know where the split is, isn't it? Ridley obviously had a difficult relationship with the crew on Blade Runner.
Yeah,
it was famously contentious. I mean, how did that? And why did that differ with the crew on Alien? Was it just the US, UK?
I think it is purely and simply that the majority of the crew on Alien obviously were people that he'd worked with quite a lot, etc. And I mean, and it's not to say that the American crew wouldn't have worked all hours. They were, but they were slightly, they didn't know him. We were in their territory, so to speak. And I think they did. It was a tough movie for them. I mean, it was a tough movie for everybody. Funny enough, I found a picture, and it was just one of me. We're both standing up, Ridley and I can't remember I think it's one of the, whether it was Larry Paul, who was the production designer, and I think Ridley or I am leaning on on a camera on the Panavision, sort of the magazine, etc., and we're literally asleep, we're asleep on our feet. Because I mean, it just was exhausting. But I mean, Alien was exhausting. I mean, when we were doing the post-production on that, which we did up at sort of at Boreham Wood, etc. We were cutting till 3 a.m. And then we'd go to some, I think it was called the Thatch Barn, some little sort of hotel place that's infamous now for some gangland murders, which we didn't know about. But anyway, we used to go there and get 2-3 hours sleep, then back into the cutting room again.
Yeah, I'd worked in the film industry for a very short time. I was like as edit support, so
Yeah.
I would install Steenbeck film benches and moviolas and things. And I saw in that time just how much people gave to their director. They give their life for 6 or 10 or 12 months.
Yeah.
It is a draining industry, isn't it? It is a very committed. You have to be
committed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Robert. When I asked Robert about what do you think the ingredients are to be successful in the industry, and he said, just determination and grit and perseverance and a love for
the passion. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was the most satisfying aspect for you working on those 2 big sci-fi movies then?
Well, obviously the most satisfying was seeing Alien and actually going over to America, being flown over there, going around all the previews, etc. And getting the kind of reactions to those, of which there's some wonderfully apocryphal stories about some of the previews because people hadn't kind of seen that, I don't know, intense sort of scariness before. I mean, it was different. I mean, maybe the original Boris Karloff and Frankenstein, but slightly, different in a way. But this was really in your face. So Alien, I think, and seeing the success, really, in answer to the question, I think the success of going and standing on Hollywood Boulevard outside the Egyptian Theatre and literally seeing the queue round the block, the entire block, and coming round, so the serpent swallowing its own tail, that was fantastic. My God, what a buzz, and I guess sort of being flown around in the 20th Century Fox private executive jet from preview to preview, not bad, eh?
Fantastic.
It was a good buzz.
Yeah, I think, as you say, the lines around the block, it's, people want these phenomenons to happen now, don't they, with films, and it's just not the same world we live in, and it took a very special film, phenomenon, didn't it, to do that.
But Blade, sorry, to carry on, because you mentioned Blade Runner was one, but Blade Runner, sadly, I mean, when it came out, rather like 2001, was not well received by a lot of the critics, and so, a lot of... There was a degree, I think, of competitiveness and sort of maybe even sort of professional jealousy over here. And I remember seeing a few colleagues now who'll be nameless at a BAFTA screening of it, where one of the tandem group, Jerry Perenchio, was there, and he sort of came out of it and he was looking sort of slightly apprehensively at me and said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, no, it's pretty good, etc. But I could see a few people sniggering away in the background saying, yeah, Ridley's got it at last. This one's not going to work for him. Little did they know. So it is absolutely bizarre. 2 films, 2001, that took a while for the audience to find it. And really the same for Blade Runner.
And thank goodness, we've got them on whatever format we want to watch them on these days, and people were able to catch up with them. Maybe they're ahead of their time ultimately, maybe.
Possibly, yeah.
Certainly in the case of Blade Runner, I remember when I first watched it, I thought it was going to be another Star Wars movie. It had Han Solo in it.
Sure.
And I was, what the hell is this thing? It took me another 10 years to fall in love with it, really. There were multiple versions of Blade Runner, of course. What do you think is the best version? The one with the voiceover that was originally released, or the one that you saw recently at the Albert Hall?
I think I have to say the one I saw recently, although it was definitely conceived as a sort of Raymond Chandler-esque type film noir. And there's still shades of that there, even without any voiceover. No, I think the new one, because that was what did it for me. It's the separation. It's suddenly having the music separated out, which means that they've therefore got to put subtitles with the dialogue, etc., on the screen, and suddenly it made me aware of how little. Because one of my contentions always with it, that it was the sort of the way because I loved Hampton's first script, as I've oft said, but it was not. It was a much more intimate version. It was really much more sort of people love story version, and it was very sad and very poetic. Whereas Ridley, when he sort of wants his vision, his vision of cities, he wants to open it up, then obviously the characters in that vision sort of can, by default, become slightly sort of smaller, I suppose. But I have to say, in seeing it at the Albert Hall, and suddenly, my problems with some of the dialogue, etc., which again were mainly probably in my own head, I can notice some of the differences in the levels when they've had to ADR some of the dialogue in. You can kind of, you kind of notice all that. But hearing at the Albert Hall, of course, that all went. So I was just aware of the visual poetry, the picture and the music and everything. Oh, Christ, it was fantastic.
It is an art movie, ultimately,
isn't it?
It's a
total art movie. Absolute art movie, yeah.
And I wonder if, they'd let Ridley do what he wanted and not have the voiceover initially, whether it would have had the same trajectory it's had, over these years.
Yeah.
Impossible to know, I guess. What did you think of Blade Runner 2049? Did you see that?
I enjoyed it. I didn't think, obviously, one I used to have, I've still got copies of somewhere of all the kind of the Sherman Labby storyboards and things. And of course we had so many openings, and that farm opening was one of them that we were possibly going to shoot for the original Blade Runner. I enjoyed it, but I just don't think it'll endure. I don't think it's got any more to say, really.
I think the thing that really makes Alien and Blade Runner stand out, as I think you sort of hinted towards it a moment ago with Alien, is that it's a self-contained movie. Whereas I think trying to recreate Blade Runner was always going to be an impossible task for them to do, even with the incredible director, Denis Villeneuve and all those.
Yeah, no, he's a great
guys
director.
And girls involved. I thought Arrival was fantastic. A bit of a thankless task trying to recreate Blade Runner. What do you think then that Alien and Blade Runner have in common, given they're both so culturally impactful, weren't they? Do you see them as both distinct in that regard, or do you see that there's some common thread between the two?
Common thread between the two of them. Well, Alien certainly ain't a love story, that's for sure. It's just sci-fi with a difference. Again, it was, Alien was credible in a way. I think. I don't know what the
I think you've hit the nail on the head though, just by saying that. It's the credibility. I think it is. I think it's, again, going back to that world building thing. They managed to make an environment which you can genuinely believe you're in, and it's been said many times before, I'm sure by yourself as well, how when they decided that Alien was, truck drivers in space, as it were, and adding the cat and everything, grounded it in a reality that we can all imagine ourselves being in. It's not some fantastical thing, which in a way, I suppose that's what sci-fi is, isn't it? It's not about spaceships and monsters, it's about relationships.
It's about people, and unless you empathise with those people, whatever the story is, that is definitely my sort of mantra. My thing about sci-fi is that, whatever the image is fine, but it is insignificant compared to the characters that dwell within the images. You've just got to, in the same as any story, you're actually telling you've got to care, hate, love, whatever it is, those characters, and feel for them and whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, they were sort of every people in a way, weren't they?
They were. It was the opposite of Star Wars, which in a sense, is sort of phantasmagorical, whereas this was very grounded, gritty and real, and though you still don't actually see enough of it, but it's like having gaffer tape on some of the the cockpit seats, etc., where they've split with wear and tear, and you see you go into an old truck, etc., and just one that's been around the block or around the world a few times, and it has that kind of wear and tear, and that's what Ridley was trying to get, the look that he was trying to get.
Yeah, I think and I've people like Roger Christian, who of course worked on Star Wars and bought all that junk. They spent like $1 million on junk, aircraft junk and everything. And I think subconsciously we know that's a real thing we're looking at, don't we? It's not just been 3D printed or moulded out of something else. No. There are real items in front of us, and I think that adds adds credibility. And we were talking about it in the cafe just down the road here earlier about how, even in the screens in Alien and in Blade Runner, they're physically there. There's not been post-production on top of it. And I think either consciously or subconsciously, we're convinced by it. We know that light is interacting with that face, looking at it. And as soon as you put it in post-production in a CG environment, I find it uncanny as hell.
I know, we have lost something, there's no doubt about it, and with modern movie making, etc., and the ease of CGI and the fact that, even in post-production, we did cover this, we did cover that, so we could change that scene, we could do, we can just sort of stick something in.
There's something about having that infinite palette, isn't there, that you don't end up finding those happy mistakes that you would shooting stuff in camera.
Just sort of a couple of things, from our discussion earlier. The sound, I thought last night watching Alien that the sound is part of the reality, the viewer's reality of it. It's part of the reason why it grinds you so well into it. You feel everything that these guys are feeling at the time. Jamie,
I was saying about Terry Rawlins, who was the sound editor originally, wasn't he?
He was. Funny enough, I think he'd done Watership. The first movie he edited, I think, was Watership Down, I think, and then I think Marty called up Ridley and said you should really use him as your editor, etc. So hence him doing Alien as editor. But he brought with him as an editor. He had just a wonderful, intuitive vision as an editor, but I mean, carrying all his sound design, his ideas for sound, his ideas for music. I mean, he was just formidable. He's wonderful, and again, he's a big element in those two movies, not to be underestimated. Again, they're dying like flies. We're losing them all, one after the bloody other. I'm sort of looking over my shoulder. Shit.
Yeah, he's a hell of a talent, wasn't he?
Amazing.
I got to see like a Q&A thing. I think you did one of them with Wayne Imms up with the
Yeah,
sound.
yeah.
I saw one of those once when Terry was there, and he felt it, didn't he? Like he
totally.
Yeah, it was part of him, and he
was
you
amazing.
know, how bold of him to say, "I'd love to do Alien, but I don't want to do the sound editing. I want to edit it."
Yeah.
And it as you say, Paddy, it's all those elements put together
worked.
that really create that reality.
well, the other thing I thought was the casting is just perfect. They're such iconic roles. I don't know whether that's because the film's become such an iconic film.
Well, that's an interesting one. You don't know. I mean, you often wonder whether the guy that was supposed to play Ian Holmes' part, had this...
Or John Hurt's part, do you mean?
John Hurt's part, sorry. Yeah, you're absolutely right. John Hurt's part. Whether he had this... I think he had diabetes and he had some problem. I don't know. But he had to, after 2 weeks, we basically had to recast and start again. But I wondered what, it'd be interesting to know what, because that part, although John Hurt was sort of highly ranked then, but this kind of gave him another element, brought him to the attention of a huge new level tier of the audience out there who might not otherwise have seen him, so to speak. So, I don't know what the answer to that is, but the parts were, pretty damn good, and they were all great.
Yeah, I sat opposite John Hurt on the tube once, and I couldn't stop looking at his chest, thinking that something terrible was going to happen. That's how that film has embedded itself. I saw him as that character, and each of them embodied those characters so well, didn't they? Sigourney has always struck me as quite a formidable woman, even though she's sort of clearly got her, sensitivities and things, but she's quite an impressive woman.
She's a strong woman, that's for sure. But it was a very tough part for her to play on this, because whether Ridley sort of engineered it, I think he did engineer it slightly. I think he sort of talked to the other crew, sort of the other artists, basically, sort of not to be too friendly to her, sort of to kind of isolate her a little bit. So, and again, as the only kind of survivor, and with people like Yaphet always sort of kind of not liking the idea that, a big guy like him is going to get done in by an alien, etc. He didn't quite like the idea of dying, etc. He kept trying to argue with Ridley, corner Ridley, and argue with him about, do you think I really should die? And yes, Yaphet, you got to die.
He probably wanted to kill the alien himself, didn't he?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, Harrison obviously was used to working with directors like Spielberg, maybe Lucas less so, but Spielberg very hands-on, very willing for his participation in changing lines and things. But Ridley, of course, known for his distance. How did you see that relationship between Harrison and Ridley?
It's just the same old thing I've seen sort of time and time again. I mean, it started off on The Duelist with, because Ridley had been operating, since the beginning of time, and that's the way he worked. And we, on The Duelist, I persuaded him. I sort of said, look, this is a movie now. We've got big sort of name stars, and they're really going to want to, feel involved with the director, etc. And you really ought to try doing this with an operator. So we got a mate of mine called Simon Ransley, who was a brilliant operator, really, really good. And he went out there, and after a few weeks, just Simon came up to me, and he said, "Look, it just doesn't work. You've got to let Ridley operate on his own." And he just walked away. He went back home, which was very sad, But Ridley, operated on that, and then I don't think we had any problems with him operating on Alien, as I remember. We obviously had A and B cameras covering everything. But on Blade Runner, we're out there, we've got the unions, which are strong in America, and still are. So he had to sort of have an operator there, and I just initially, and then I think he did start operating. It's gone a bit fuzzy now, but I think he did start operating, and but he still was more concerned, as the operator, with the vision of the piece. And so I suppose just Harrison wasn't comfortable with that, etc. I mean, again, the part was a different one for Harrison too. He wasn't playing the kind of the bullwhip carrying hero or the whatever. It was totally, he wasn't Han Solo. It was different for him, and I guess he wanted a bit of hand-holding as well.
But I guess Ridley had him on the movie because he trusted his instincts as well, had to get on with his job.
No, that's the way I think Ridley was expecting it to all work. I mean, maybe it's slightly overblown, but I don't know. I mean, from what I saw of it, obviously, and from what I heard about it, sort of, I think Rutger and Harrison got on sort of pretty well, but Rutger was very easy and laid back, and so he didn't require the same sort of thing off Ridley. He just got on with it, and hence, him kind of, chipping in with his own lines at the end, which have such added pathos now that he's died. Gordon Bennett, yeah.
I still get welled up every time I watch that scene. I saw it at the BFI last year, I think it was, Blade Runner, the final cut again, and just has me lump in my throat, and and as you say, more impactful now. He was a hell of a person, wasn't he?
Yeah, the Albert Hall. Men were crying.
Yes,
definitely.
yeah. Thank goodness for the lights down, eh? Yeah, because Blade Runner was released in the summer, up against E.T.
Yeah, well,
and everyone was E.T. crazy, and it was lovely and beautiful story, and then there's this apocalyptic kind of depressing world. Imagine if that had been released in October, it probably would have been a hit straight off the bat, wouldn't it? It's so much.
I don't know. Maybe the public hadn't quite. They still weren't. It wasn't a large enough public that were kind of sci-fi aware, that were kind of into that kind of story. Who knows?
It's funny, isn't it? Because we were saying this is the way over that the way people view films, they think they're made, and you keep making them until you get it right, and then you release it. But of course, you're up against the pressures so much. It's like for us with live TV, it's got to fucking happen. Like this is what we often say, it's got to happen. It has to be on air at this time. That's the schedule, and it's the release date, isn't it? I mean, how do you cope with those challenges as a producer? As you said, trying to balance that relationship to being faithful to Ridley whilst keeping Fox happy, knowing that this schedule is looming, this release schedule is looming. How do you cope with that?
Well, it's not easy. It's just you do your flipping best. I mean, it's quite amusing, actually. I mean, there were so many amusing stories about it. I mean, on 2001 there were amusing stories, but on Alien, I mean, they're more sort of slightly personal, because Peter Beale, who's become a good friend, who was the kind of head of production of 20th Century Fox in England, and he was a very astute clued up guy who'd worked as a sort of in production, and he was experienced, and he used to visit the set. I think he got wind of the way Ridley kind of tended to work, and he'd have the sort of loyalties of his crew and everything like that, who wanted him to get all the sets that were built. And I think he pulled the tunnel sequence, I think, where the alien is after Dallas, the Tom Skerritt character, the captain, and I think he kind of didn't quite believe the stories that the set wasn't being built, and he went and actually found something being built, etc., and said, sort of told me off and said, "Ivor, what's this? We're not having this. We're not building this." And Ridley kind of managed to cheat it the way he did, which is still pretty effective, just the alien coming out of a darkness of somewhere. It's amazing what you can do when you have to, use the elastic bands, etc., which goes back to 2001 again, which is where, when you've got an effect shot that's got like 14 stages to get through, and each time it's snakes and ladders. Each time one of those stages has got a problem and is not right, you've got to go back to square one again, because you're on one piece of negative, and so it's all bipack camera stuff. Yeah. So and I only had dinner the other day with Brian Loftus, who's another fascinating guy, in actual fact, who did he did all the Purple Hearts, the YCM separation masters on the movie. He would just be there with a bipack camera, sort of doing all these sort of like color tests, etc. He's got many interesting stories to tell. But we've become good buddies, and he's one of the survivors.
Were you on set when the chest burster scene
Well,
was?
I actually hate to say that I don't think I was. No, I might have come down a couple of times, but no. You've got your first AD down there, and etc. And there was always, unfortunately, especially as a line producer as opposed to a producer, you really are. You are in kind of working mode. And I know that I was kind of, for whatever reason, I suppose because everybody thought I had some vague idea of effects, I was always put sort of in charge of the effects side of things, or anything connected with that were kind of my baby. So, and it was the same on Blade Runner.
Were there any scenes that you particularly remember being on set for that struck you in either of those movies?
Oh, I remember being on the first day's shoot at Shepperton on 2001, the TMA-1 excavation site, so watching them all in those suits, which were to die for, and Stanley hand-holding this Panaflex camera, just following them down the kind of the rampway down into the pit. Bloody awesome. I mean, there's a bit of movie history. And there were lots of, obviously there were lots of sequences I can think of on Alien that one was around at, most of them really. I mean, Brett's death, for one. I think we shot it on I can't remember, I felt a funny feeling it was on a Saturday morning, but I bought in our Alsatian, Sheba, stray Alsatian that we'd acquired, and it was my job, wouldn't be allowed today. The cat was there, and basically I suddenly produced Sheba, who was definitely a cat and squirrel chaser, out of the shadows, and the cat's reaction to my dog, that was in the film.
That's great.
But
that's great to yeah, that's.
But that would not be allowed now.
No,
it's not correct.
No, welfare and all that
the
stuff.
The cat was fine. I mean, but he had to shut himself. That's it. Cat would have probably the dog was actually such a softie in the end. Having chased the cat would have probably killed it. But anyway.
If you weren't on set, just to go back to the chest burster scene, I mean, what was the reaction from? What was Ridley's reaction to how that shoot went for that? I mean, obviously it's such an iconic scene, and everybody seems to be genuinely shocked in it.
Well, I think they were. Yeah. God, so many stories, aren't there? I think it's sort of because he. The way I don't think they were expecting the kind of the offal, the blood sort of to be the blood spatter, the range of it to be quite so big, etc. And listen, and Veronica Cartwright, who got the main load, is such a good actress anyway. She's wonderful.
Yeah, that I was saying on the way here, wasn't I? That, oh God, she does is so gut punching. Like, you feel it, you think,
no, she's brilliant.
Jesus, you're there, aren't you? She's very much the sort of conduit for the audience, isn't she? She's us there. Yeah. No, there's so many of these scenes, aren't there, that are so iconic, and there's these apocryphal stories and everything. I think people, I mean, I'm sure they all knew that they've been told that something was going to happen, but maybe just not the extent to which they were going to be blasted. But
traumatised.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, it traumatised the 8-year-old me or whatever I was at the time.
Jamie showed me a picture of you in 2001. You're actually in the film, is that right?
Yeah, I play. But what is it? One of the guys in the hibernaculum is called Kaminsky. Yeah. So
how did that come about?
I was sitting in my office, and suddenly I think I can't remember. It was Derek Cracknell who was the first, or one of the seconds. Who was one of the guys? A guy called Dickie Holt, who I think was the second. Just came charging by saying, Ivor said, can you come up onto the set, etc. And do you think you can keep your eyes closed and not flickering, etc. So I said, I haven't a bloody clue. But I mean, I don't know how I actually existed in that thing, because I actually get claustrophobic. I also get vertigo. So, the eyes don't appear to. I don't think it's frozen or anything like that. No. So anyway, so it's not bad. Who realised at the time that was it was still going to be in the cut. I was murdered by Hal.
What a thing to be able to say you starred in, let alone worked on.
Murdered, yeah.
So you have a credit on that as a...
I don't think I do.
Do you not? No,
never.
Uncredited,
no,
right?
Very few people had credits on 2001. I mean, if it's anything that one would say about Stanley, and I mean his film of filmmaking, I mean he basically is in charge, and I was looking at something the other day that's quite telling in a way, and you can't take anything away from Stanley because he is what he is. But there's a thing that he put an advert in New Yorker or something like that, or was in the trades. No, it was in the trades, and it was as a result of some article about Douglas Trumbull being in charge of special effects, and it was basically a rebuttal of that, saying, not to take away the fact that he was a key effects technician, but it was Stanley Kubrick who was the director of all effects, etc., and nobody else. And that's the way Stanley's always, it's obviously not, I think Spartacus probably, and his experiences on that, the way making movies in Hollywood, I don't think he was very comfortable with that, and he saw coming to Europe he would have much more control. He'd be much more the auteur that he wanted to be by coming here, and he remained that. He was absolutely in charge of every facet, everything.
Were you in any other of your films? Did you make any cameos in other ones?
I don't think I did, to be honest. On the first day of shooting on Blade Runner, I remember I think it was Harrison is about to eat the chop suey from the thing, before Eddie almost comes up and taps him on the shoulder. I remember treading in a can of white paint, which was pretty embarrassing, etc., and having to be extricated from that and cleaned down. But I don't think I was... No, I directed Second Unit on Untitled, on whatever it is, on Blade Runner, and on BIOS. But again, there's usually, you have to, unfortunately, union problems, so they're not normally, not normally credited or anything like that. So I am ended up as a sort of producer.
What have you done in the interim years then? Where we've talked up to Blade Runner, and then we've jumped to BIOS. Was it just keep chipping away, writing these scripts?
I was working up until running a production company, because after Ridley and I went our own ways, I had one slightly abortive attempt where I was taken on by a producer to sort of develop projects. And then shortly after that, I got taken on by a director to sort of run his commercials company, which really worked. So for 15 years, I wasn't making the most creative of commercials, which I didn't like. I was uncomfortable about. Not to say they were bad. We made huge things, like when the Channel Tunnel was opened, we did all the commercials for that. When the Electricity Council was privatised, we did all the commercials for that. So we did lots of high earning, high profit commercials, and we really did well. So I was suddenly, for the first time in my life, really earning good money making commercials. And but I wrote in my spare time, always writing in my spare time, just chomping away, which now looking back on it was quite selfish in a way from the point of view of Marion, my wife, because she always had to basically, put up with it. But which she did, bless her. But I think over the years, one suddenly you've got to learn something, and I did learn eventually. I did a few courses. I remember doing the old Sid. I'll think of it in a second, but anyway, I did one of his, and I think that, and I thought, sod it. My aunt had died, and again, incredibly lucky. I got a little inheritance from her, and I just thought, what with that? I'm going to pursue a career back in pictures again. And I went with this, I'd taken this young director on called Miguel Sapochnik as a sort of, to do commercials. But his heart lay in movies, it was quite clear. And so we started writing together. And so I left, started writing together, and then I wrote, produced, and financed in the end, to the tune of the best part of $100,000, this film called The Dreamer, which I don't know whether you've ever seen. It's really good, actually. It got on the short list for an Oscar and for a British Academy nomination. We got awards in Sundance, and we got offers to awards all over the world. But it served its purpose basically because suddenly Hollywood was beckoning, and they all wanted us to write the feature script of it, which we eventually, and now in hindsight, went the wrong direction. We went with Miramax. We should have gone one with the other more conventional studios like Warner's or Fox or Universal or something. But we went with Miramax. Wrote a brilliant screenplay, really fascinating screenplay, as yet unmade, called Human, which is sort of based on the Dreamer. And the Dreamer has all kinds of notions of a little bit of Blade Runner. It's got, all kinds of things. But it's, really interesting subject.
Mm. Yeah, I'd like to see that.
So that's the way. I just kept on writing. That's it.
Mm. It's interesting that both yourself and Robert Watts and Ridley all got their kind of craft in commercials. Because each one of those is a little film, isn't it? You have to tell a story. You've got a budget. You've got a deadline, and
it's a brilliant discipline. Really is, especially when you're working with someone like Ridley.
It was film school before film school, wasn't it? Really?
Yeah. Totally. Yeah.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my chat with Ivor there. Ivor and I have stayed in touch. We WhatsApp each other every so often and catch up on how we're doing. Like all of us, though, he too is trapped in his house during the lockdown, and I've promised that I'll be taking him out for lunch as soon as we can, maybe even bringing along Peter MacDonald, who's a forthcoming guest on this podcast, well-known second unit director and director in his own right. So I very much look forward to doing that. If you're new to the podcast, please do check back on some of the previous episodes. There's 21 of them now for you to choose from, including interviews with an editor, a sound designer, an actor, puppeteers, special effects people, lots and lots. My next episode is going to be with camera operator Madeleine Most, who worked on the original Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back, and is another force of nature. Madeleine is fantastic to talk to. She's great fun. She's got a lot of energy. She's actually the partner of Peter MacDonald that I've just mentioned as well. And we had some nice couple of occasions where we chatted, and I conducted an interview with her. And then I went on to interview Peter a few days after that. So those two podcasts will be coming up shortly. If you'd like to support me in my Filmumentaries endeavours, whether it's the podcast or the videos that I produce, then please do check out patreon.com/Jamie Benning, where you'll find details about how you can sign up. There are a number of tiers starting from $1. $1 per episode, $1 per month could make all the difference, and it means that I can focus on this work rather than some of the other freelance work that I may or may not have. I do really appreciate any support that you can give, whether it's doing it through Patreon or whether it's talking to me on Twitter or Facebook. I really appreciate the retweets and the replies. It's nice to know that there's a good core listenership out there now. And please do share the podcast with your like-minded movie-loving friends as well. Thanks for joining me once again for this episode 22 of the Filmumentaries podcast. I hope you can join me for episode 23, which I'll release in April, and that'll be followed by episode 24, also in April, 2 a month at the moment. So I appreciate you listening, appreciate you sharing, and I look forward to you joining me again next time.